for those that don't know, I want to introduce one of my friends, referral partners, and an incredible author who I've had the pleasure of reading one of his books so far. And it's really resourceful. And so there's going to be a lot of time for Q&A towards the end of this interview. But if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in and we'll get those answered. So Weston, just so everyone can get to know a little bit about you, just give a brief description about who you are, what you do, what you're all about.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Lauren. Weston Lyon, author of 21 books, founder of Plug and Play Publishing. I've been writing books for, I hate to admit this, but since 2005. So that's, 16 years at the time of this recording. And I wrote my first book back in 2005 for a fitness business that I owned. Because in all honesty, I was broke and struggling, and I was looking for an answer to instead of cold calling, instead of, doing a lot of haphazard networking events, I needed something to help really, boost my business. So I was reading a book. I read a lot of books. I used to read back then. I used to read like a book a week just to glean as much information as possible. Just so happened to run across this one book by one of my favorite authors, Dan Kennedy. And inside that book, he talks about 3 ways to position yourself as an authority and stop chasing prospects. And that was the book, actually the name of he didn't say that specifically, but the name of the book that you just held up is Stop Chasing Prospects. And that has a lot to do with it, because in 2005, like I said, I was broke and struggling, looking for something. And in that book, he said, first thing you have to do is write a book. You position yourself as an authority, you separate yourself from the competition. And I did. So I was like, okay, well, if that's what I have to do, I'll do it. And ended up doing that. And my business completely changed. And
so how did you start making the transition between realizing that writing books is a thing into helping other business owners doing the same?
Yeah. So in 2005, whenever I wrote my first book, like when I said everything changed, like conversion rates went through the roof. I was able to triple my prices within 12 to 18 months. I was in the fitness industry. So I went into my niche. I fell into it originally was the niche I fell into was women in their 40s and affluent women in their 40s and 50s. So I go into their homes and I would actually train them on how to use their own body weight. So that's what my first book was about. Well, after about 12 or 18 months, I was able to start going after commercial clients. And I was able to, triple my fees, and I was able to, raise my prices and everything raise my rates for commercials as well, for commercial clients as well. And then I rode that wave for probably 3 years and did really well. And then in 2008, I wrote a second fitness book. And then I ended up writing a bunch of books that year because it was really the only way I knew how to package information. Like today, I have online trainings and, presentations and stuff like that. But back then I wrote one book. And then after I wrote my second book, I was like, you know what? I kind of have all this knowledge and I just want to kind of get it out there. I didn't really even mean to sell the books. It was just like, here's some tips on time management. Here's some tips on marketing. I just started writing books. And what happened was between 2008 and 2009, I wrote 9 books in 11 months. And
wow,
it was a lot. I don't say that to brag or anything like that. It's just a fact. That's just what I did. It wasn't intentional. I didn't have this, ultimate strategy behind me to write all these books, but I just ended up writing a bunch of books on topics that I was passionate about. And once I did, people just started taking notice. They started asking, and these were, friends, referral partners, clients. Everyone was like, how did you do that? I just had a system. I had a process. I had a blueprint that was, down pat. So I was just able to duplicate that over and over and over again with different types of content. So I started helping my friends. And so I helped probably a dozen of my friends write and publish books. One went on actually to become a best-selling author. And I was like, wait, there's something to this. I'm able to help people, and there's money in this. And people are willing to invest money in it because it can help them grow their business, which was different than the business I had. Helping people get in shape was fantastic, but helping someone make money, it's just a different type of, client. And I loved both of that. I loved being able to not only, serve someone, but help them make money and grow their business as well. So it was really nice.
So why should someone start writing a book in the first place? I know you worked with multiple people, whether it's the fitness industry and just packaging information, but if you're running, a random business like, an IT services company or even a copywriting company, what is kind of one of the benefits of writing a book?
Yeah, well, that's a loaded question. What kind of benefits? I mean, there's so many benefits. In fact, I'll give you a few of them right now, but there is a resource that I have called Authors Confess. And it actually tells the best 27 reasons that I've heard over the past 16 years of writing and publishing books. Number one, positions you as an authority in your field. Number two, what does that really mean? Position you as an authority. It increases trust. And when it comes to selling, and I'm talking specifically service businesses, because product businesses are fine, but what I've found over the years is service-based businesses. Those are the types of business owners who should write books no matter what. Mm-hmm. And if you own a service-based business, it all comes down to two things: increasing trust and decreasing risk. And by positioning yourself as an authority in your field, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. Writing a book is one of the best ways, if not the best way. As soon as you write a book, you immediately increase that trust with a prospect.
What type of business owners should consider writing a book?
Yeah, it's a great question. So business owners who should consider writing a book, or service providers specifically, a couple different answers for that. Number one, if you're new to a niche and you really want to make a splash, you want to start generating leads, writing a book is one of the best ways to do that. Because when you enter a niche, you're a small fish in a big pond. And what you want to do is really separate yourself from the competition. And by writing a book, you do separate yourself immediately from the competition. For instance, let's say, either you're a financial advisor or an IT guy or, insurance salesman, whatever the case may be, right? I mean, let's take insurance as an example. How many insurance agents do you know? I mean, I know dozens.
So many.
Right. I know dozens of insurance agents. However, how many insurance agents do you know that actually have a book? So I've helped numerous insurance agents write a book. So in their city, whenever they have a prospect call them and they send them their book, you have two insurance agents, right? One with a book, one without a book. Who do you think the prospect is going to immediately trust? Mm-hmm. The one with
exactly.
a book. So the trust level goes up. And like we talked about before, there's two things that happen in any business, but service businesses specifically. Two ways to make a sale: increase trust, decrease risk. When you position yourself as an authority, you automatically do that. You increase the trust, you decrease the risk, and you separate yourself from the competition. The other type of service provider who should consider writing a book is, not only do you want to generate leads, but maybe you're at the end of your business and you really want to leave a legacy. You want something, whether you're going to sell that business and you're trying to put more value into the sale of the business, which is a great option. If you like, what's the word I'm looking for? You leave a book, they inherit a book. The next owner inherits, a lead generation tool like a book. That's a huge way to bump up your sales. However, if that's not what you're looking for, maybe you just want to leave a legacy. I have one guy right now who I'm working with who owns a furniture store, multi-million-dollar furniture store. He doesn't care about the making money part. He's already made his money. However, he wants to leave a legacy. So he wants to, talk about his success and, give tips on not only success, but on the mistakes he's made, because he's made more mistakes than, he says more mistakes than anyone else. That's why he was successful. So that's another type of service provider who might want to write a book. And then I think, and this is just my personal opinion, just because I've been in business for 21 years now. And I think any service provider who sells a high ticket item where you're making, at least $1,000 or more per sale, especially when you get up into like $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 per sale, it's a no-brainer to have a book. It's like, it's actually silly not to have a book because of the way your book positions you as an authority and the way it helps you convert more sales. So I'll give you a couple examples. So like speakers who charge $3,000 to $5,000 per speech, no brainer. Every speaker should have should have a book, because if they have a book, they're separating themselves from their competition, right? You have two speakers, one with, one without. Who's going to win out? The one with the book. And it just makes more sense. I mean, all you have to do is get 1 or 2 extra sales per year, and you've more than, paid for your investment into writing that book, whether it's with time or with money. I mean, and I have another client who's a coach, right? She's a coach from Philadelphia. She charges $12,000 for a year to work with her. It's a no-brainer for someone like that to have a book, because when you're selling a $12,000 product, all you need is one sale. And when I'm saying one sale, it's just one sale pays for the investment in your time and money to actually write the book. But we're talking, you can use that the rest of your life. So if you just made one more sale today or this year, let's say, than you would without a book, it would be completely worth it, because you can now leverage that book for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And it's books have a funny way of not dying off like some technology does.
No,
whether it's a platform that dies, they're just kind of never ending. I know, I have some books on my bookshelves that are actually from the 1600s.
Oh, wow.
Which has been just passed down, but they still last forever, or at least centuries.
They do. So that's actually a great point. I mean, because no one throws away a book, right? If we talk about tools, and that's what a book is, by the way, a book is a business tool. So I don't even though I've written fiction books, I don't help people write fiction books. I only help entrepreneurs write and publish fiction books to grow their business. That's the niche that I've created for myself, because I know what a book can do for somebody. And in what you said, I'll just go off on a tangent real quick. People don't throw away books. One of two things is going to happen. They're going to read the book, and it's going to sit in their library. And every time that they look at the book, or every time they pull it off the shelf, like for instance, the book I, sent you, Stop Chasing Prospects. If you're looking at how to position yourself as an authority, you pull that book off the shelf and read, chapter 16 or, chapter 18 or whatever. And you're looking and going, oh, that's great. You remember me every single time you pick that book back up. Or you don't keep that book and you don't throw it away. People never throw away a book. They give it away or they sell it. So the whole process as an author starts all over again. So if Lauren, for whatever reason, doesn't like my book, right, that would be sad.
Would be sad, but I like it.
if you didn't like it, or if you just have too many books and you read so much, because I do that all the time. I have so many books. Sometimes I give away books to friends or mentees or clients, or just sell them because I have so many books in my library. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll take a book, I'll never throw it away, but I'll give it away or I'll sell it. And then the process starts all over again. That person will never throw it away. They'll either give it away or keep it. So it's not like what you said of the other tools, right? It's not like a website. What do you have to do? Update a website, depending on your strategy. You have to update your website every quarter at least. Okay. If you're an SEO strategy, probably every week, right? Yeah. You gotta, exactly. If you have a brochure, probably once or twice a year. So even though those things are important to do, they're tools that constantly have to be updated, right? And don't get me started on social media, because social media is a beast. It's an engine that you need to constantly feed. By the way, nothing wrong with that. That's just part of a marketing strategy. The nice thing about a book is once it's done, it's done. You never have to write the book again if you don't want to. Can you come out with a second edition? Sure. But I've actually talked to a lot of clients out of doing that, where I have some clients in my coaching calls. I have a mastermind that I coach all my authors in to help them market their book. I had one guy a couple of weeks ago. He's a coach. He's a retired Hall of Fame hockey coach. He goes, when should I release my second edition? I said, well, that actually just depends. It depends on your strategy. You don't have to ever release a second edition unless you really want to. You can leverage this book literally for the next decade without ever touching it again, unless you had a specific strategy around a second release. So, and then you can either do a second edition or a second book.
So every business owner is at a different stage of their business life. I'm, 22 months at this point into my business, whereas you're 21 years into your business. Mm-hmm. So when should a business owner consider writing a book?
Yeah, great question. So it all depends on what they're really trying to do. So I mentioned one before, like if it's a new business or you're going into a new niche, I think it's a no-brainer to write a book so you can separate yourself from your competition. But like, let's say you want to add speaking to the mix, you should definitely, write a book. It's another reason why you should write a book. Another reason why someone should write a book, it depends on, again, what stage they are in their life. It's actually, if you break this all down, right, you have new business owners, you have veteran business owners who are successful, and then you have a lot of people in what's called the squishy middle. So you have people who have been around for a little bit, but they're just not gaining any traction. They're not really succeeding the way that they want to. So if you look at that spectrum, if you're a new business owner, if you're going into a new niche, it's a good idea to write a book to separate yourself from the competition. If you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're already successful, and maybe leaving a legacy is something that you want to do. However, if you're already successful, you can actually dominate the competition even more by writing and publishing a book. So that's another reason why someone would do it, because if they're already successful and they want to really dominate the competition, by writing a book and separating themselves even further from the competition, they're able to even flood the market even more. And since they're already successful, they already have the cash flow to be able to start advertising that book heavily and in getting themselves out there and building a platform that they can either use in their business or they can leverage after that business. So there's a lot of people who will sell their business and they'll build a platform by writing a book, and then they'll sell their business so they can start like either speaking on their platform or start a consulting service or whatever the case may be. And then you have the people in between that, right? You have that squishy middle. Those people, it really depends. If you're in a squishy middle, I mean, there's a lot of people in there. So it depends on your motivation and your intent. It depends on your, what I call starting with the end in mind. What do you actually want to do? Are you comfortable where you are? Because I think the business owners should do whatever I think your business should provide the lifestyle that you want. So if it doesn't matter what end of the spectrum you are. I don't care how successful or how you define success. It has nothing to do with money, in my opinion. It has everything to do with lifestyle. So if you want to make more money, a book is a way to make more money. However, if you're comfortable with where you're at and you don't want to bring on any more clients, then I wouldn't write a book. It wouldn't be beneficial to you. But if you're looking to go from that where you are, that what I call the squishy middle, and that, by the way, it's not a derogatory term. It's just say you're not as successful as you want. You're not new and you're not as successful as you want to be. If you want to get to that next level, then writing a book is one of the ways to go out and do that. But if you're comfortable, there's no point in doing it. It's just a waste of time and money. And writing a book it's an investment of time and money. However, like I said earlier, once it's done, it's done. You could then leverage it for the rest of your life.
So I guess the first question is, what does the writing process look like for non-writers? And then how would you advise non-writers to go about actually creating that content?
Okay. All right. So let me see if I can answer it this way. So a couple things with that. So number one, most of my clients come to me and they're not writers. I can probably over the past decade count on my hands how many people are actually writers. They consider themselves writers. Most people don't consider themselves good writers. Me personally, I did not consider myself a writer until after I wrote book 5 or 6. And like the first 5 or 6 books, I was just writing for me. I wasn't writing, to be a writer. I had this knowledge in my head that I needed to get out on paper. And so that's why I decided to write a book. Now, to help answer this question, I think some people get stopped. They stop themselves in their tracks because they don't think they're a writer or they don't think they're an expert. So a couple things happen with that. Number one, if you have imposter syndrome and you don't think, you're an expert, that's going to stop you from even writing, whether you're a good writer or whether you're not a good writer. So we have to cover that first. So real quick example of that. I was listening to this interview. This was way back in the mid 2000s, where this one guy, Matt Fury, he was a fitness writer. And he talked about the difference between being an expert and not being an expert. And I bring this up because I think anyone listening to this or anyone, looking at this content should realize this. if you have imposter syndrome, you don't have to be an expert. An expert is someone who doesn't know more than everyone. An expert, and this is what this guy said, Matt. He said, an expert doesn't know more than everyone. They know more than their average prospect. That's all an expert is. So anyone in business, any service provider who's been in business for, a couple months to a couple years is an expert because they know more than their average prospect. And really what happens is whenever you're selling something, you have someone who has a problem or they want a solution. By you providing a solution, you automatically know more than that person. So you're actually an expert, and that gives you the right, because both of us, me, you, and everyone else listening, it gives you the right to write that book because you actually know more than the average prospect. And they want to know that information. That's why they're coming to you, by the way. You have information that they want to know. Whether you think it's completely basic and everyone else knows it, trust me, not everyone else knows it. We have Brian on here, IT guy. Brian, I don't know anything about IT. I have an IT guy that I call. I don't know anything. I don't want to know anything. But the thing is, you do. In the basic stuff that you know, everyone else wants to know that information whenever they have a problem with their computer, right? So that makes you an expert. So that's number one. Number two, if you don't consider yourself a good writer, there's really, and like I said, I didn't think I was a good writer. And by the way, I was in high school and college, I was a C student, straight C's all the way through writing, hated writing. But I think
the best entrepreneurs were those BC students as well.
I think the thing is, I hated writing because of what I had to write. I had to write term papers or, God forbid, poems. Like my fiance, which we're getting married here in the next couple of weeks, she loves writing poems. She loves writing research papers. I think she's crazy. But in high school and college, I hated that kind of stuff. I was never good at it. However, here's the thing. When it comes to not being a good writer and you want to write a book, there's only two things that you need. Number one, you need a passion for what you do. And number two, you need a process for writing that book. So if we look at it, think of yourself, Lauren. Give me one. I already know one of these, but tell me one of your passions. What's one of either a hobby or something you're really passionate about? Maybe what you have in your, I was just going to say.
Copy and coffee.
What you have in your
prepared.
All right. So I'm going to turn this over to you and interview you. So let's talk about coffee just for 30 seconds. Perfect. What's your favorite thing about coffee?
Personally, I just love holding a hot coffee mug and just the process of drinking coffee. That's my ultimate favorite thing. And I've actually turned that into my personal brand. And so I just tell people, just think of me as a hot cup of coffee.
Nice. So do you like the smell of it?
Yeah, the smell, the process of making it, the taste,
so it's meditative
how it makes
for you
me
almost.
feel warm. Yeah, it's a very ritualistic thing for me. And it isn't necessarily about the caffeine either, which a lot of people mistake me for that.
Now, let me ask you a question. Is there anyone in your life, friend, family, coworker, who loves coffee as much as you do?
Oh, absolutely. There's probably people in my network that love coffee even more and could tell me the chemical balance of coffee.
Okay, so when you and someone else who have a passion for coffee get together, how long does that conversation usually last?
Hours.
Okay, that proves my point. If you're passionate about what you're talking about, it's easy to write a book. All you have to do is talk about your passions. All you have to do, now you have to structure that, and we can talk about that later, but it's really easy to write it because if I ask you a couple of questions about coffee, you just started spitting off answers and you weren't prepared for that. That's how easy writing a book is whenever you're passionate about the topic. Now, on the flip side, you need passion and a process. And there's an actual process for writing a book. And when it comes down to it, let me ask you a quick question. I'm a big fan of history and everything like that. How long do you think, whenever Henry Ford, let's go back to the early 1900s, Henry Ford started creating the assembly line of cars. Before he did that, how long do you think it took manufacturers to build a car? How many hours?
Oh, hours, days, if not weeks.
It actually wasn't that long. but it took them.
Oh, really?
It took them well, once the process was down. Like, it wasn't like the first person who built a car, but once it was down, it took them about 12 to 12 and a half hours to build one car. All right. Once the assembly line was made, it was done in under 2.5 hours.
Oh,
why?
wow.
Because it had a process. So that process helps build a car 5 times faster. So whenever you're looking at writing a book, there's 2 things you need. It doesn't matter if you're a writer or not. You need passion for it, and you need a process. And when you have those 2 things, it doesn't matter if you're a writer. You have everything you need to move forward and write a book, because all you're doing is taking your passion and putting it inside that process. And the book will be, it'll be written. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be a fast process for you. It could be. I've helped someone write a book in 35 days, and I've helped people write books in a couple months. It really just depends on you and your strategy. It depends on, how much time you want it to take. You can do it in a weekend. The guy who wrote James Bond, all those series were written in a weekend. Not every book, I should say, not the entire series. It just depends on, and you don't have to be a good writer to do that. Passion and process.
So I think one of the reasons why maybe individuals don't write a book is that imposter syndrome. But I think that imposter syndrome, it sounds like those individuals have some lies or myths or misconceptions about the book writing process. So what are those misconceptions that you can bust on here to kind of free up those walls?
Yeah. So number one is number one I already covered. So actually, there's two biggest myths that you have. Number one is you're not an expert.
Yeah.
And number 2 is you're not a writer. But there are a couple other myths that I can certainly go over for you. So another myth would be how long it takes years to write a book. And that's really just not true. It doesn't take years to write a book. It really just depends on the kind of book you're trying to write, but it also depends on. I'm sorry, I was looking for an example for you. I have a couple of book covers that I can show, but so when it comes to writing a book, people say it takes years to write a book, and that could be true. However, it shouldn't be. It should take, my clients take an average of 3 to 4 months to write their book. And here's why. When you actually know how long a book should be, it makes the process so much easier. So now we're not talking about fiction. Okay. We're talking about a non-fiction book for an entrepreneur to write. And the whole point is to grow your business. It's to lead clients from front-end products to back-end profit centers. That's where all your money's being made. So when you understand that, you want your book, your physical book, the one you held up before, you want that to be between 100 and 200 pages in the final paperback book document. Anything larger than 200 pages, you can get away with, but it really deters someone from reading it, especially if they're reading it to gain that knowledge fast. So once it goes over 200 pages, you kind of get in a danger zone. Now, here's the beautiful thing, Lauren. Most people don't realize this. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. So you write your manuscript in a Word document, and then you convert that into a paperback book. And it's 2-to-1, meaning every page in a Word document is 2 pages, roughly, in your paperback document. Meaning, if you're writing 100 to 200 pages in the final paperback book, you only need 50 to 100 pages in a Word document. That makes it so much easier when you break that down. In fact, I have a timeline that I give. That's one of the first things that I cover with any client is, okay, why are we writing this book? What's the end goal? How long do you want it to take? So as an example, a few years back, I had a client that wanted to write a book in 4 months. And that was based on, she had a specific goal in mind. I can't remember what it was. She had some kind of event coming up where she wanted her book done. I think it was an anniversary. So she wanted her book done in 4 months. We took a look at that and said, okay, well, we have X number of days to write this. You only need, and just so you know, it takes most people, especially if you have the right process, 1 hour will equal 1 page. That's typical.
Mhm.
Can it go faster? Yeah. Can it go slower? Sure. But typically 1 page, 1 hour. So if we want to write a 50-page book, which will turn into roughly a 100-page paperback book, it's only going to take you 50 hours. So then we just take a look at the chart and we figure out, okay, well, it's only going to take, you want to get it done in 4 months, 1 hour, 1 hour a day, you'll be done in less than 2 months. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So
I feel like that frees up a lot of that weight too.
it does.
And that it is possible.
It is. It does free up a lot of that weight. And that's probably one of the biggest things whenever someone says it takes too long, it's because they don't understand how long the book should actually be. Now, real quick on that note, most whenever I say 100 to 200 pages in a Word document, most people are thinking, oh, I really want it to be toward the 100-page mark, right? Where, I'm sorry, they want it to be 100 pages in a Word document, so it's 200 pages in their final paperback book. You could, but it doesn't have to be. All right, so let me tell you a couple stories. So here's Angela. This book, it took us just a few months to write. I think 6 months total. That was publishing. That was writing and publishing. It took us like 6-7 months. The book is a smaller book. It's only like 130 pages, but Angela charges $12,000 to work with her. And this book is able to convert for her. Doesn't matter how big the book is. It just matters that you're giving the content that someone wants. So am I trying to say you shouldn't write a longer book? No, I'm not trying to say that. If you have more to say, then you should say it. I think, Lauren, you and I, we're both writers.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to copywriting, you probably tell your clients the same thing. It doesn't matter how long or how short it is. It just needs to be what it needs to be.
Exactly.
So if it turns out being longer, it turns out being longer. You just need to be able to get your message across. Turns out being shorter, it turns out being shorter. Most writers understand that. Most, people who aren't writers don't understand that. It just needs to be as long as it needs to be. So let me give you another example. So, this is one of my favorite stories. So Fred, he's written, I wish he would still be working. He's actually retired. He worked with me for 3 years. We did 2 books in 3 years. Fred came to me via a referral from a friend, and he was looking to help me. I was trying to consult him to position himself as an authority when he went to a trade show. So Fred was going to this trade show for like 3 or 4 or 5 years, investing thousands of dollars, like tens of thousands of dollars, to be at this trade show. But here's the thing: he had 150 of his ideal clients at that trade show. That he was there for 3 days with them. So over the first few years, they hardly made any money at that event. They made some, but not much. So he came to me. He said, "Well, how do I position myself differently? How do I separate myself from the competition?" I said, "You're gonna want to write a book." He said, "That's a great idea, except for the events in 35 days." And I said, "Fred, it depends. You've already invested a couple $1,000s in the event. How bad do you want to, how bad do you want to make this successful?" And he said, "All right, let's do it." Now, by the way, I'm not suggesting anyone go out and write a book in 35 days, because that was writing and publishing in 35 days. And there was an emergency fee on top of that we had to charge us, because we had to, it was a lot. It was a lot in a small period of time. Nevertheless, I tell you this because this book is under 100 pages. It's only 90 pages. Like that's total paperback. So it was like, I think it was 35 in it. Like he wrote 35 pages in a Word document, and we turned it into like a 90-page book. This book though, and before I even give you this figure, results not typical. Okay. Most people don't make any money with anything that they do. There's a lot of variables when it comes to success. So this is not a typical kind of client. Most people make zero money because they don't do any work with it. However, I tell you that, I specify that because Fred took this to the event. I helped him create a marketing plan around the 3-day event, and they generated over $149,000.
Wow.
That was from a 90-page book. Now, again, it doesn't have to be long. It just has to give the reader what they're looking for. It has to give them the answer that they're looking for. And if it doesn't matter how long or how short it is. Does that help? Did I answer your question? I got excited about that one.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting. I think it gives us a good view of the potential it can bring to your business. So what happens after you write the book? So you just talked about those clients, and you had, you can use that same example with Fred, who wrote his book very, very quickly. What happens after you actually write the book, get the content down? What's that process next?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there are three, if we look at the 50,000 foot view that all authors go through, there are three phases. So phase one is writing, phase two is publishing, and phase three is marketing. So in the writing phase, it's all about writing the book. We don't edit. We don't want to edit it. Like, a lot of people self-edit, and it takes a lot longer to write a book when you self-edit. Any writer listening to this right now knows that. Like, we want to hold back and not self-edit, but sometimes we do. If you just hold off on the editing and just write the book first, in the writing phase, it's going to go a lot faster. So once you actually have that, the book, the manuscript written, and you feel good about it, right? And it's important to feel good about it. And there's a lot of things that go into the writing phase, but once you feel good about it, then you move into the publishing phase. And there are three steps in the publishing phase that everyone's going to go through. So number one is editing, number two is design, and number three is publishing. And there's different ways of publishing. However, we want to edit it first, so we're just going to clean it all up. So, like, for instance, whenever a client comes on board with me, whether they are with me in the writing phase and I actually help them write that book, or they come to me with a book already written. As an example, like, ghostwriters are great referral sources for me. I work with a lot of ghostwriters because ghostwriters only work in the writing phase. They want to take someone's information, they want to write a book for them. It's an expensive process, but worth it for some people. Once that book is written, the ghostwriter refers me that client in the publishing phase, because they don't want to go through the rest, because there's a lot that goes on in the publishing phase. But those three, and I gave you the 50,000 foot view, so there's three steps, right? But there are a lot in those steps. So you first edit. So we clean it all up for that client. So we read it over a couple different times. We look for spelling, grammar, punctuation. We make sure everything is clean in the book. And then we design the interior of the book. We design the cover of the book. The cover is one of the most important things, by the way, especially if you're self-publishing. And then afterwards, you decide how you're going to publish it. You decide how you're going to publish it before you do any of that work. There's three different ways of publishing, but that's the next step for you to kind of answer your question. So you write it first, and then you publish it, and then you go out and you market it.
Yeah, let's go into that marketing piece, because obviously your business is working with business owners, using the book as a lead generator, whether they're building a legacy or increasing your sales, increasing your credibility. And I know you've told me before, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you are not in the business of making book sales, but rather creating a tool to generate business. I'm correct in that, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I talked about it earlier. There is an additional revenue stream with books and book sales, especially if you're a speaker. Speakers can make a killing when it comes to book sales. I'll answer your question in 1 second, just really quick, in case anyone's listening as a speaker. A lot of my speakers will go to speaking events and pre-sell their books before they even get to the event and make an extra $500, $1,000, $1,500 on top of their speaking fee before they even hit the stage. So there's money to be made, especially if you're a speaker. However, when it comes just a straight out, service provider, the revenue stream is really on what I call the back end profit centers. So you have a front end to a business and a back end. The front end is how you get clients in the door. So a book is a great front end product. It's a cheap product you can give away for free. You can sell it for $10, $15, $20, depending on the type of book or what your strategy is. And that leads people into your door. So it leads them to their back end profit centers. So if you're a coach, if you're a consultant, you get paid for your time. That's your back end profit center. If you're a financial advisor, an insurance agent, an IT guy, or even a custom jewelry designer, you get paid for your service. That's where all the money is. So there's way more money to be made on the back end than on the front end. And even the speakers I talked about, they get paid more on the back end. I have one guy who charges $5,000 per speech. He sold over 3,000 books in the past, I think it's 18 months since he's published his book. So if you just multiply that out, it's roughly $10 profit. Depends on how he did it. And I kind of coach him through it, but it really depends on the sales promotions that he ran. But out of 3,000 books, let's say the average, let's say he made it not lower than this, but he should make at least $10, if not $15 per book, pure profit. So if he made $10 per book and he sold 3,000, that's $30,000 in additional revenue stream. However, whenever you're charging $5,000 for a speech, it's actually easier to make 6 sales to make that $30,000 in speaking fees than it is to sell 3,000 books.
Yeah.
And his name's Joe. He comes to me all the time, and he's like, oh, I'm up to 2,000 books. I'm up to 2,500 books. I'm up to 3,000 books. I'm like, Joe, that's fantastic. You just keep doing what you're doing, but just remember the end goal. The end goal is your back-end profit centers. If you put as much time and effort into book sales as into the back-end profit centers, your profits will absolutely skyrocket. So
that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, and by the way, real quick, Lauren, by the way, that's whether you have a book or not.
Yeah.
Okay. Whether you have a book or not, there's still front end and back end to your business. Mm-hmm. You need to lead people in and then lead them to your back end profit centers. A book just happens to be the best tool to do that. And there's a lot of different reasons, which you've already covered. Positions you as an authority, increases your credibility, increases their confidence in you. It decreases the risk because you're an expert in your field. You're giving them information. So there's so many different reasons why that's the best. But then you will need to lead them to your back-end profit centers. And there's leverage points all the way through your sales process that you may or may not realize where a book can fit in to help lead them to that end goal.
That's awesome. So last question before we open it up to the floor. I know we've already answered one participant question,
sure.
But what is the biggest mistake you see authors make after they publish their book?
Yeah, that's a great question. The biggest mistake that I see authors make is they don't leverage their book for the rest of their life. See, we have this thing, and most entrepreneurs, not all, most entrepreneurs have what's called SOS, shiny object syndrome. So we do one thing, and then once we complete it, we have that sense of accomplishment, and we're off to the next. And don't get me wrong, I've done it. It's probably why I wrote 9 books in 11 months, because I went from one book to the next. Didn't have a strategy for that at all. But it was that's actually a good way of putting it. It was probably my shiny object syndrome. That's why I wrote so many books. But nevertheless, we don't leverage what we already have. And that's a huge thing for any business owner. You need to leverage what you have. So once you write a book, right, and once you publish a book, so you've already gone through the hard parts. Now you're in the marketing phase, and it's time to leverage that. And like I said, there's different leverage points throughout your entire sales process. So and the reason I actually saw this mistake is this was a couple of years ago. I was talking to a client. We wrote a book, probably one of my first clients. And it was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years into her having her book. And I'm talking to her about business. I said, how's business? And, it's okay, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, how are you using your book? And she said, well, I haven't really used it over the past couple of years. And I was floored. I'm like, you invested this time and money into doing it, but you're not leveraging it anymore. She's like, well, the newness kind of wore off. I kind of went off, and I started doing this. I started generating these lead magnets. And then I started going off, and I started doing this, and I started doing that. All good stuff, by the way. Nothing wrong with that. However, I said, oh my goodness, you're not leveraging your book. And it made me think of this. Have you ever seen, do you know anything about architecture?
A little bit, but you probably know more than me.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Trust me, I'm a simple guy. I went up and looked this up, but it made sense to me whenever I heard it in a class one time in college. So I looked it up, and I learned, the simple things. So there's this thing called a keystone, and it happens whenever you have an arc. So like the St. Louis Arch, right? I've always wondered how the heck that thing stays together without falling over. Well, there's this thing at the top called a keystone. Mm-hmm. And all it is, it's, whether it's, if it's a brick archway or, a stone archway, it's the center block at the very top. And what I discovered was that keystone bears the least amount of weight. So it's not, it's not the most important in terms of structural, strength, but it keeps every other stone in place. That's what your book is. Your book is that keystone. Once you lock in that keystone, it should support everything that you do. So I went to this client. I said, okay, well, let's look at all the leverage points. Let's look at your business. How are you generating leads? How can we use the book there? How are you converting sales? Let's look how you can leverage your book there. How are you getting referrals? Let's look how you can use your book there. How are you retaining clients? You see the point, right? Yeah. There are these leverage points all the way through that we can now take that one tool and we can insert it into different areas to help position you as an authority in the beginning, to help start converting more sales. And it's used differently just depending on the overall strategy that you have in your marketing. But you got to leverage whatever you have, whether it's a book, whether it's something else. That's the biggest mistake that everyone makes, especially new authors. They take the shiny object, they launch the book, and then they put it away after like a year. And that breaks my heart.
Yeah. Stay the course. Put the blinders on, all of that.
Well, one thing that kind of came to mind earlier on is when he was like, service businesses really need to write a book. And I just wanted to hear Weston's thoughts on the tangibility of a book and putting that in the hand when you're selling something invisible like a service. And does that kind of lend some concreteness to that service in the mind of your potential customer?
Yeah, Brian, that's a great question. And you mentioned that earlier, and I've never put that into words like that. So thank you. I will swipe that and use that in the rest of my presentations, because that's a great way of looking at it. It adds, I don't know if you said this word, but tangibility, right? It adds something physical to the mix. And it's a great point. I never thought of it before this until you asked that question. But yeah, it adds that physicality, that tangibility to the sales process. Whereas whenever you're selling a service, it's intangible. You have to, when we talked about increasing trust, decreasing risk, it's hard for someone to understand. That's why we have brochures. That's why we have websites. It's something that they can see. It's something that they can read. It's something that they can, grab onto, because otherwise it's just you talking, right? And they can't, if they're not in, like, they don't know your jargon. So they're grasping for this, something tangible. It just feels like nothing. It's nebulous. It's just air, and they don't necessarily trust you on that. And if there's any air of not trusting you, or there's risk involved in that service, then decrease of the trust decreases, the risk increases, and there's no sale. Or if someone is in a service business and they can't convey what they mean in their words, their speaking words, then there's confusion. And anytime there's confusion, a confused mind never buys. So to clarify that, a book is a great way. It's a tangible way of doing it, where I'll give you a quick example, and I think this will help you. And so when I first started my fitness business, I didn't intend to go, with commercial clients. I wanted to stay in the niche that I created for myself, affluent women in their 40s and 50s, and go into their homes and help them get in shape just using their body weight. That was just the niche I fell into. Well, after like 18 months after I wrote my book, I ended up being in the CEO's office of this company. It was a graphic design company. And he had 12 employees. He was looking to get his 12 employees in better shape. And it decreases their health insurance. It does a bunch of different things. I never knew that, by the way, until I was in his office and he was telling me these reasons. But here's what was important. I was selling this service, something intangible. However, whenever I walked into the room, he had my book. That was my first book I ever wrote. He had it on his desk. I sat across the table from him. The conversation, no kidding, lasted less than 5 minutes. He basically looked at me. He looked at my book. He looked back at me, says, "So what are you going to do for my company?" That was the sales pitch. I didn't say a word because he already knew everything he needed to know in the book. He knew I was an authority because I wrote the book on the subject, right? He knew what kind of stuff I was going to do. He knew my service based on reading the book. Like, I didn't sell anything in the book, but based on the information in the book, he knew what I was going to do with his clients. Now it's just a matter of terms. It was the easiest sale. And now that I love that tangibility, like you kind of brought to my attention, is, you have that tangible product. That's exactly what it was. So great question, man.
And thank you, Brian, for adding that into his copy swipe file.
Well, yeah, I wanted to give opportunity to get that out. And we mentioned it earlier. So
that's a great question. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Just real quick, have you ever had a client who doubted the process and ended up pleasantly surprised?
All the time. In fact, I'll give you a story that I find funny. I don't know if you will, but my fiance owns a custom jewelry business, and so I've helped her write one of her biggest dreams in life was writing a book. So I've helped her write 2 books for her business, and then we've actually co-authored 3 fiction books together. And when we wrote the first book, she was an okay client. And when I say client, like she was a client. Like I showed her exactly what to do. She went through my process, everything like that. When we wrote the second book, she admits this now, but she did not admit it during the process. She fought me tooth and nail the entire way through the process. Even though she's seen me do it for over 100 and some clients, she still fought me on the process because she had her own way of doing things. I said, just do me a favor and just follow the process. We'll get it done. And for the first probably, I don't know, 30, 45 days, she literally fought me on the process. And she's not like she doesn't fight me on stuff. We get along perfectly. But for whatever reason, this book was near and dear to her heart. And she wanted to control everything. And after that time, she just let go. And it only took an extra, maybe month to write it because she was able to follow that process. Hopefully that answers your question, because a lot of people don't want to follow, they don't like following like once they're in it, especially writers. If you like writing, you have your own process in your head. If you just submit to the process, and you're going to get it done faster. I actually find that people who aren't good writers write faster because they just let the process take over and do it themselves. I'll give you a great example. I just brought on a new client a couple months ago. And so he's a coach, and he is, he speaks, but he doesn't he's not like a professional speaker, but he's done a lot of keynote presentations over the years. And he really wants to take the knowledge in his head and put it into a book. So he brought me on to help him do this. And literally the first few weeks, we really are mapping out the book. We're not doing any writing. But then once we started the actual writing process, he told me, and this was only a couple of weeks ago, he told me this, he goes, this process is the complete opposite of what I thought we were actually going to do. Like he was ready to write from day one, and I slow everything down. I make sure the worst thing you can do, by the way, is start with a blank page. So anyone who's ever written anything, if you start with a blank page, hardest thing you can possibly do, whether you're a professional writer or not. So what I do is I slow everything down. I make sure we have everything in place. I give them templates. They know exactly what they're going to do. I coach them through that process. And he's like, this is complete opposite, but he's already has 4 chapters written because he just followed the process. And that's what it really comes down to. He's passionate about what he's talking about, and he has a process now. And without the process, it can be difficult.